Welcome to Cambridge Forum with Paul Starr, discussing freedom's power, the true force of liberalism. This is a rare occurrence. Paul and I don't appear very much on the same platform, and it's a real thrill for me. And I think those of you who've decided to forego the first playoff game of the Red Sox and listen to Paul will not regret your decision. I've known Paul for more than 30 years. I first met him when he was a graduate student doing what was probably the first piece of serious work on the discarded Army, the Vietnam veterans. He went on, still in his early 30s, to win the Pulitzer Prize, as well as the Bancroft Prize, the top award in history, and the C. Wright Mills Award, the top award in sociology, all for one book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine. Paul is a scholar who goes wide as well as deep, and he went on to study media, not media in the sense of the internet or even television, but media going back hundreds of years as a force in our democratic and civic life. And that resulted in his 2005 book, The Creation of the Media, which won the Goldsmith Book Prize. Now, Paul and I in the late 80s, along with Robert Reich, after the Democrats had lost 3 elections in a row and liberals were feeling rather down, decided that it was time for a new unapologetic opinion journal of American liberalism. And that, of course, was the American Prospect, and our friendship and co-editorship has continued for almost 20 years. In that period, Paul has gone on to rethink the first principles of liberalism. And I had an intern at the Prospect come up to me the other day and say that our work was very helpful to him in arguing with his father-in-law. And when we founded the magazine in the late 80s, that was exactly what we had in mind. That for liberals who were feeling beaten up upon, this would be a journal that provided clear thinking and fresh ammunition and a sense of renewal and resilience. Freedom's Power is very much that kind of book. Again, it doesn't speak of liberalism in the sense of Michael Dukakis or Walter Mondale or even FDR, but liberalism as a constitutional and theoretical tradition that goes back to Madison and Locke and the whole idea of constitutional government. And I think at the center of this is a paradox whereby government needs to be strong enough to protect us from tyranny and from interference with our own private lives by government, but also strong enough to protect those rights, and in the 20th century to create affirmative rights of opportunity and security. I have not read any book that traces this history and makes the case for its continuing power and continuing relevance as powerful as Paul's new book. So he can explain this much better than I can. Paul Starr.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that wonderful introduction. It's great to be here tonight to be able to talk with you about this book. I want to thank Cambridge Forum for this opportunity. I want to thank all of you who gave away your tickets for the first game of the playoffs at Fenway Park in order to be here. That was, over the years, some of my friends, especially in Boston, have put to me one question more persistently than any other. As a liberal, they ask, how can you be a Yankees fan? Well, it goes back to growing up in New York, I guess. But, I'm sure as a kid, I liked being on the winning side. And in those days, the Yankees were always winners. But, come to think of it, from FDR to Truman to JFK, liberals were more often than not on the winning side. I grew up with the idea, and I still believe, that liberals have a winning political proposition in America. And that proposition being, first of all, that all of us, black and white, men and women, the children of privilege and the children of poverty, that all of us have an equal right to freedom. And second, that a politics which truly lives up to this principle can also create the prosperity and the power that make a free society more than a dream. But since the time I was in college in the 1960s, liberalism has been under steady, sharp, and often shrill attack, while many liberals have been too uncertain in their convictions, or sometimes too angry about their critics to argue their own case effectively. First, there was the siege from the radical left, which denounced liberalism for complacently accepting the injustices of capitalism and miserably failing to achieve full equality. Next came the broadsides of the neoconservatives, who originally directed their criticism against the grand ambitions of liberal social policy. And then during the Reagan years, a revived free market conservatism, allied with the religious right, mounted the first round of a frontal assault on modern liberal government. Round two of that offensive began after the Republican takeover of Congress in 1994, and round three after George W. Bush became president. And throughout all those years, right-wing populists kept up a steady barrage of attacks, greatly amplified by the advent of conservative talk radio in the late 1980s and Fox News in the following decade. Now, all of this took place during a time when the South flipped from the Democrats to the Republicans, when unions suffered a steep decline in membership, and a gender gap opened up as white men turned to the right. The decline of the unions reflected structural changes in the economy, while the Democrats' loss of the South and of white men in all regions stemmed largely from a backlash against social changes set in motion by movements that liberals had supported and championed. Which brings me to the central question raised by liberalism's critics. Is something basically wrong with liberalism as a public philosophy? And has that philosophical error been the source of failed policies and the primary reason that Democrats lost their status as the nation's majority party? Or alternatively, is liberalism basically right? And did liberals lose such influence as they enjoyed via the Democrats, chiefly because of changes in society that they either could not control or could not conscientiously repudiate, and to a lesser extent, because of remediable mistakes in policy and strategy? A great deal hangs on the answer. The first view, the view that there's some deep philosophical problem, implies a need for a new public philosophy, regardless of how our circumstances change. The second implies that new conditions may provide the grounds for a liberal reconstruction if liberals can correct the strategic and the policy mistakes of recent decades. Now, I take the second position. There is much that liberals need to re-examine, but they do not need to give up on their principles, rend their garments, and beg for forgiveness. They need to build on the strengths of their tradition and refashion it to fit new conditions. Yet that view raises questions just as difficult as the first. What are liberalism's fundamental principles, and how should they now be interpreted and applied? Now, these questions have a new urgency. As the Bush presidency stumbles toward an end, the cycle of American politics seems to be turning once again. Now it is conservatism that seems exhausted, divided, and deflated as a result of a devastating combination of overreach and underachievement. Overreach in Iraq and on domestic issues such as Social Security, and an utter default on America's long-term challenges in the environment and energy, economic inequality, healthcare, and many other areas. Moreover, the backlash against liberalism that began in the 1960s may now have petered out. Particularly among the young, public opinion has shifted in a more liberal and tolerant direction. None of this guarantees a liberal recovery, but it creates an opening which liberals ought to seize not just through electoral politics, but by clarifying what they stand for and want to accomplish. Now, I wrote Freedom's Power, as I say in the preface, to get straight what liberalism is about and to set straight what has gone wrong with it in recent decades. The book offers a historical interpretation of liberalism, a defense of liberal principles in their modern democratic and egalitarian form, and an analysis of what went wrong, beginning in the 1960s, and how liberals ought to reframe their approach to public policy. Although Freedom's Power is a short book, it takes a long view of the subject, going back to the origins of constitutional liberalism in the 17th and 18th centuries in England and America. Now, two principal reasons motivate my approach. First, modern democratic liberalism sits atop the foundation that constitutional liberals created and that continually needs defending. As Michael Lind correctly observed in his review of my book, at least I thought it was correct, in the New York Times, I take the view that Anglo-American democratic liberalism is the left wing of classical liberalism, not like European social democracy, the right wing of democratic socialism. And second, I argue that from its beginnings, liberalism has been a method not only of constraining power, but also of creating it. That constitutionally limited power can be more powerful than unlimited power has been a crucial lesson of the past 3 centuries and the great counterintuitive liberal triumph. At the core of liberalism is the idea that each of us enjoys an equal right to freedom. But liberalism has never been solely about rights, even as it has embraced a broader, more positive conception of freedom. Rights of personal and civil liberty imply that we are individually accountable for our own actions. Rights to political liberty imply a civic responsibility to make democracy work. And rights to the basic requirements of human development, such as education and a minimum standard of security, imply that we have obligations to each other, mutually and through our government, to ensure that the conditions exist enabling every individual to live in dignity and have the opportunity for success in life. The central liberal project I write in this book is the effort to guarantee these freedoms and to create the institutions and forms of character that will lead a people to assume responsibility, not as an external burden imposed upon them, but from a force within. But translating these general aims into effective policies depends on evidence and experience. Modern liberalism emerged in Britain and America from the late 19th to the mid-20th centuries, often by trial and error, without any theory, in response to the competitive conditions of a more democratic politics, the dislocations of industrial capitalism, and the crises of worldwide depression and war. The enduring reforms, and many were not enduring and were winnowed out along the way, but the enduring reforms did not sacrifice freedom for prosperity and power, but successfully reconciled them. For example, unemployment insurance and other elements of Social Security have helped citizens to preserve their independence as well as their dignity at moments when they are most vulnerable to becoming dependent, and have encouraged them to accept technological change, trade, and other sources of turbulence that are necessary for economic growth in a dynamic economy. While expanding the state's role, liberals have confined it to limited but strategic purposes and insisted on stronger protections of civil liberties and an autonomous role for the press, for science, and for other civil institutions to keep state power under scrutiny and in check. And these mechanisms have supplemented the classical liberal system of constitutional restraint. The major liberal initiatives of the 1960s, equal rights for blacks and for women, anti-poverty efforts, Medicare, a stronger consumer, worker safety, and environmental protections, these were in line with this tradition. And for all their limitations, rectified long-standing injustices, and helped to advance freedom, opportunity, and a decent life for millions of Americans. As in earlier reform eras, however, some of the policies and programs failed or backfired. Liberals also became so reliant on the courts and preoccupied with claims based on race, gender, and other aspects of identity that they were no longer able to command a political majority with a persuasive general vision of the public good. In foreign affairs, liberals were right to turn against the Vietnam War, but some overreacted and were unprepared to respond to legitimate occasions for the use of American power in the Persian Gulf in 1991 and the Balkans soon thereafter. The liberalism we need now has to rebuild a democratic partnership at home that includes working and middle-class families, and a partnership with other liberal democracies in defense of our common values and security. There ought to be no going back to a fractured identity politics or to the reliance on the courts. Liberals have to match their policies to the imperatives of a majoritarian politics. After years when conservatives have not just accepted, but accelerated widening disparities in income and wealth, liberals need to reframe their economic policies around the goal of a broadly shared prosperity. And in national security, where the Bush administration has undermined our constitutional liberties while dissipating American power, liberals ought to argue that constitutionally limited power can again be more powerful than unlimited power, and lay claim to a democratic and inclusive tradition of American greatness. Now, I was asked only to speak for a short time at the beginning. I actually could go on longer, but I understand that the procedure here is for the speaker only to say a few words at the beginning, just so that you know what I stand for, I guess, and then to open it up for questions back and forth. And Bob, I don't know if you want to start this off. And
I'd love to. Thanks very much, Paul. Looking forward to the revival of American liberalism and the revival of liberalism as a majority idea and politics in this country, I think you can identify some good news and some bad news. The good news is that the right has really blown its opportunity to govern and to try to become a majority philosophy. Another piece of good news is that issues that divided America and that divided liberals from voters have changed in a way that validates liberalism. Young people in particular have a great deal more tolerance of difference, of cultural difference, of race and gender difference than older people. History is moving in our direction. I think the bad news I would characterize, I would cite a couple of things. And both of them, I think, have to do with money. All three of them have to do with money. One is the disproportionate influence of money in politics, in which money crowds out civic activity. Another is the disproportionate influence of Wall Street on both parties. And a third is the great difficulty of persuading voters that tax and spend is as good a deal as it used to be. And given the tremendous needs of public investment that we have, that would once again persuade people that the liberal project is worth supporting, how do we persuade people to once again support progressive taxation so that we can get the resources that we need to have universal health insurance, universal early childhood development, all the investment in deferred infrastructure that we need. So in one sense, it's a liberal moment, but in another sense, consummating that opportunity is going to require a very heavy lift.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I think there has been a movement toward the Democrats, toward liberals, certainly in 2006. It looks that way for 2008. But it is mainly the result of the failure, the default by the conservatives, the overreach in Iraq and so forth. And rather than a clear positive mandate for liberals. So there's a reaction going on. And the tremendous difficulty that we face is the legacy of these years of conservative government. It is the legacy abroad, where these policies have produced so much hostility toward the United States, have mired us in Iraq, threatened to involve us in another war in Iran. These policies can't be wished away overnight. They leave behind them a tremendous burden for any new administration. And the same is true at home. The legacy of the economic policies, the tax policies, and so forth, the tremendous increase in inequality in this country, with all of its political ramifications, the imbalance that has been created as a result of it. So I think we are unquestionably struggling against the burden that conservative politics and conservative government have left.
Questions? Sir, would you identify yourself?
Sure. My name is Tim Weiskell, and I'm curious because one of the correlations which you no doubt observed in writing this book was the correlation of liberalism with growth economics. And if we believe any of the material related to peak oil or the forthcoming announcements about climate change, we may be in for some real radical reversals. At the same time, many would argue that catastrophe capitalism is what the right wing has been able to capitalize upon. That is, when the public feels itself under siege, it systematically moves to the right. What's coming down the pike is not just a legacy of a few failed policies, but a whole series of concatenation of problems that have been ignored by the liberals and the conservatives for decades. How do you feel that the liberals are going to be able to capitalize upon the catastrophes which we face?
Thank you.
Well, I don't think the objective here is to capitalize on the catastrophes. It's to prevent the catastrophes, and there are means available to us. It may be that some degree of climate change is inevitable, some warming, but I'm not an expert in this area, but I believe that there are methods available. There are policies and international agreements that are available that can, over time, be effective. I don't think we have to surrender to the idea that nothing can be done about these things, and liberals, I think, have the opportunity here to meet the challenge which conservatives have completely defaulted on.
Question?
Tip O'Neill, who served this district for many years, once famously said that bipartisan politics stops at the water's edge. And you claim that the legacy the conservatives are left behind in foreign affairs has damaged our international reputation, which is unquestionably true. But liberals have equally contributed to this. Kennedy, of course, escalated the Vietnam War. When Johnson saw his record in Latin America, he said, "We're running a damn murder incorporated down there." Carter supported the Shah, Somoza, Suharto, any fascist dictator that he could find around the world. Clinton had his famous embargo, his attack on Sudan, et cetera, et cetera. So the legacy of liberals is equally heinous, actually, in foreign affairs. And until we address that, it's not an overreaction to American power that liberals have been guilty of, but an underreaction to the misuse of American power that characterizes both so-called liberals and so-called conservatives. And I know you have a real bone of contention with that, since in the American prospect, there's a feeling that you can use American power positively. And I think that's where some people on the left part company with one another.
Yes, I guess
Thank you for the question.
There are real differences here. I do believe that there are real threats, that there have been real threats from fascism, from communism, and that the United States played a positive role and has been a force for good by creating international institutions, like the United Nations, NATO, and other institutions that have been successful, that were successful in keeping, in containing the power of the Soviet Union, and ultimately in bringing about its collapse. So yes, I have no apologies for that. There's certainly other ways in which American power was used, which going back to Woodrow Wilson and FDR, that are not praiseworthy. But on balance, I think America has served a role for good, and I believe it's a good thing in the world that the United States, and not some authoritarian country, is the leading power, and that we have helped to spread human rights elsewhere. You may not agree with that, but I think the world is. I mean, look, let's just take the case of Europe today. What an extraordinary thing it is that across Europe, from north to south, east to west, there is not a single authoritarian government. I mean, consider that it was not so long ago that there was a military dictatorship in Spain and Portugal and so forth. These are, how is it?
It was international volunteers that went to help the Republican movement in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. It's not the American government or liberals in American political life, including FDR.
Yeah.
GM was supplying them with supplies and trucks and tanks. I mean, what's going on here?
But I think you have to ask yourself, how is it that in this period where the United States has been the leading power, how is it that in the same period there has been an advance in many parts of the world toward democracy and human rights? Well, I'm not saying that everything's good. I mean, obviously, I oppose the Iraq War. I am very concerned that this administration will lead us into a war with Iran. But I don't agree that the United States is necessarily a force for bad, or that on the whole its record is an evil one.
Let's give the gentleman one. Okay. Next question. Yes, sir.
Kevin Block-Schwenk from Alston. I guess the question I have is, I suppose one reason I'm feeling a little bit jaded these days, it feels like liberals create these nice structures, and then eventually Republican takes power and it gets corrupted. So, we create, the federal government should help people when there's a natural disaster, and then, conservatives get in power, and we see what happens in New Orleans. So it's kind of like, once upon a time I felt proud to pay taxes. Now I feel like I'm getting ripped off. And, what's the way in to convince people not just the liberals will spend the money, but that the moment a Republican doesn't take power, it doesn't all just turn against us again?
That's a great question.
That's a great question. I think it varies from one area to another. I don't think the Republicans have been able to corrupt Social Security. I don't think. Now, they've tried to privatize Medicare, and to some extent they have. Medicare is paying far too much to private HMOs. It's paying far too much under the prescription drug program to pharmaceutical companies. I hope we can fix those problems. But on the whole, I believe, for example, that Social Security and Medicare still perform the central functions that they were aimed at performing from the beginning. The same is true for many of the regulatory agencies, even though this administration has appointed lobbyists for various industries and key positions. They have not been able completely to dismantle the legal and regulatory structures that exist. And if we are lucky enough to elect an administration that really believes in environmental regulation and labor regulation and so forth, I think we can bring these things back to full vitality.
Hi, my name is Kyle Taylor. Earlier you were saying that people are moving towards liberalism, but I feel like I see it much more as moving away from conservatism, and that we're not really making the sell. and that they're not really joining us. They're moving against or moving away from them. So I guess my question is, what's wrong with our sell? Why aren't people buying into liberalism
Yes.
and instead just taking us as the alternative in a bipartisan system?
Well, I think I said almost the same thing that you did a moment ago when I was saying that right now in the last couple of years, there's been a reaction against the Bush administration, against the war in Iraq, against a lot of policies. And yes, there still isn't really the positive commitment to a liberal program, to a coherent liberal program. I think that has to happen. Well, it's part of the reason I wrote this book. I mean, as small a contribution as a book like this can be. There are actually a lot of other books being written this season. Bob has a book coming out. Our colleague Bob Reich does. Paul Krugman has a book coming. These are all efforts to try to make that case in as persuasive a way as possible. Still, this is not going to reach the great majority of the people. The truth is that, we really do wholesale. It's the politicians who do the retail. It has to come ultimately through the political process, through the election that's coming up, through a variety of other mechanisms, to translate some of these general ideas into, I don't really like to use the language of marketing to sell it. This is not a consumer transaction. This is the question of, where is our country going to go? And I do believe, that these ideas can be translated into a form that makes sense to people, and that is, that's what we're trying to do.
Could it be that the Republicans are using that mindset and are selling themselves, like consumers consume everything else, and that because of our principles and we don't bring them in? I guess I'm wondering what the how is. Yes, we need to convince them, but how do we do that?
There have been a whole lot of books written in the last couple of years about the language of politics, about the motions and so forth. I don't do that. Other people do that. I let them do that. They're better at it. Bob has his favorite version of this. So I'm not. That's not my skill. I leave it to the psychologists, the political consultants, and so forth, to try to figure out those ways. But that's not. I'm at a bit of a remove from that process.
Well, let me weigh in on this. I think one difference between this era and say the New Deal era or the era after World War II was leadership. We've all felt in different ways that many liberals lack the courage of their convictions, and some even lack convictions. And what we're trying to do in the American Prospect is both restore the convictions and the courage. But we're not running for office. We're not even serving as campaign consultants. We're intellectuals. And hopefully some of our work can be useful to politicians. But I wonder why we have such a paucity, or am I wrong, of leadership. I don't think I'm just looking at FDR through rose-colored lenses. And I think if you go back to 1932, 1933, although it looks like it was predestined to happen in the history books, if the bullet had hit, Roosevelt instead of Cermak, and John Nance Garner had been president, history would have been very different. Where are the courageous leaders?
Right.
Where's leadership in your story?
But before Roosevelt became president, I think a lot of people like us at the time had no confidence that he was going to be that kind of transformative leader. So we may just not fully anticipate who has that potential. And I guess I don't want to lay such stress on finding exactly the right person, because I think some people can rise to the occasion and become. And let's just take a very recent case. Back in 2000, I remember having many arguments with good friends of mine on the left who had a very low opinion of Al Gore, and some of whom ended up voting for Ralph Nader. I think if Al Gore had been elected president, under the circumstances of 9/11, he would have taken this country in a very different direction. He could have seized that crisis and made it an occasion for America assuming a positive role in the world And that opportunity was lost. But I think he had the capacity, and I think many people now who voted against him back in 2000 realize now that he had that capacity. So I don't know. I don't. The occasion can produce the leaders.
It was fated that you spoke of Al Gore when I had a question that's going to. I'd like to probe in detail how you would deal with or understand or think in an inconvenient truth. Al Gore set a stage for the environmental, global warming perspective that we think should be made. The second half of my question will sort of depend upon how you answer this. How would you fit the global warming environmental posture in the liberal mode, particularly keeping in mind Al Gore's inconvenient truth, wherein some people should not be hurt by the language I may use. In speaking about the inconvenient truth and all of the various ways in which we have depredated our environment, he said when he was proposed that there is something that is missing in his inconvenient truth. He said, "We will not, however, count the farts of the cows," which of course means the agribusiness, the food culture that is being put forth by the Union of Concerned Scientists as one of the great depravers of the environment. How would you respond to that?
I'm not sure how to respond to that, but I will just generally say that, look, there's a big difference in the way that conservatives have responded to science. They have simply denied findings that enjoy wide support in the scientific community. They have been completely cynical in their treatment of science, whereas I think liberals have historically had a much closer relationship to science, been much more supportive of scientific research, and been much more willing to take the findings of science. And I think this is one of the reasons why, frankly, the public ought to have more confidence in liberal leadership that is more grounded in scientific research. Should we go on to the next person? Yeah.
Yes, I think, being a good liberal all my life, I think we've been self-flagellating ourselves a little too much. And we've made mistakes, but when the conservatives make mistakes, they just come on stronger. They don't even bother apologizing. But I think we're fighting still this invisible army of the Norquist Rove contingency. Since the 40s, the Republicans have been denigrating the government, saying how it's so bad for you, and their message has reached these people who vote against themselves year after year after year, which is very hard for me to comprehend. But do you agree that, they have a publicity organization that's fast and quick and lies if they can't tell the truth about something? They'll make up something, it'll hit the front pages, and then the lie will be reversed another week later, but nobody sees it.
Yes, well, I do think conservatives have been very successful in organizing a movement, creating institutions, and getting their message across. But there are certain obstinate facts, and public opinion has turned against them. Has turned against them because those obstinate facts have become undeniable.
I hope it will show up in the election. I hope.
Sir?
Elliot Prager. I'm a little bit pessimistic because the last 20 years has underscored the fact that political messages are accepted only by the vast majority of our countrymen in Soundbites. How do you overcome the challenge of educating to a philosophy which deals with compound sentences?
Well, I think there are other people who can translate those sentences into sound bites, and I guess I don't believe that there is something inherently too complicated, too subtle, too nuanced about liberal ideas that that ordinary people can't understand. I think a lot of it is very straightforward and relates to their most basic interests. So I guess I'm not as pessimistic as you may be.
Yes.
Thank you for this talk. I wonder whether the polity is capable of, if you will, taxing and spending after all these years of, and I think very widespread acceptance that this is basically a bad policy. And since that will be required to achieve what you hope, what liberals hope, I hope, it leaves me with a certain pessimism.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's true. The conservatives were very clever to defund the state, to cut taxes and leave this overhang of deficit, which is going to make it very difficult to undertake new initiatives. But I think there is a very significant public demand. Healthcare is a very good example where there are very widespread needs, very widespread insecurity that our current healthcare financing system creates. And so as difficult as the fiscal realities are, I believe we are going to make progress. In fact, I think this is going to be issue number one if there is a new Democratic administration and a Democratic Congress with more than just the slight margin in either house. I think 2009 may very well be the time when we make some very significant progress toward national health insurance. So I'm not, the underlying situation is not good. It's very difficult, but I believe this is a surmountable problem, and I think you have to take each issue specifically and make your case in that area, like healthcare. Yes.
Yes, I want to expand on a remark that was made just before and then go on to another remark, so okay. I have 2 points to make. As far as the response to science goes, in many ways, I don't think the liberals are so very different when it comes to the issue of global warming. They're a little bit better than the conservatives. They agree that there's global warming going on, and they agree that human activity contributes to it. But they don't cut very far when it comes to suggesting what sort of measures we can take to end global warming. And to expand on the remark in reference to meat, for example, the impact which our agricultural policies, specifically industrialized farming and husbandry, has on global warming, there's absolutely not a shadow of a doubt about it. You can read a UN report called Livestock's Long Shadow, you can read the Sierra Club, you can read the Union for Concerned Scientists, but both liberals and conservatives come out pretty much the same on that issue. There are other issues going on in the country which I feel are very difficult to address oneself to. And that is, for example, the enormous expansion in homeschooling, the impact which this has on our educational system, the fact that most homeschooled children tend to be conservative. I don't have statistics on that. But it's changing the fabric of our society, and it's doing so in a way that's very rarely noted in any way. A lot of that is in a response to the enormous widespread pornography that's now part of our culture. There's no response to that. And to the drug trade. I don't see liberals or conservatives coming up with a response to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you've raised a variety of different issues. I don't profess to have any expertise on agriculture and policies related to that. I think if we can do something about coal power plants, we may be able to address one of the really major sources of carbon emissions. It seems to me there are a variety of ways that you could deal with this issue. You don't have to address every single aspect of it to be able to succeed. I actually don't know the numbers on the of homeschooled children in America, but I don't think we're being overwhelmed by a tide of that kind. And in any event, if some conservatives want to withdraw their kids from the schools and educate them at home, frankly, I think they have that right. I don't really have a big problem with that. I think we need to solve the problems of the schools. We need to have the resources to solve those problems. And if some people want to follow a different direction, that's okay.
In terms of underscoring, though, some of the issues that have been raised throughout the evening and addressing the issue of what about leadership, it seems that some of the problem is that growth economics is the inconvenient truth. That what we're facing is a circumstance where perpetual growth just isn't on, won't happen, can't happen. And it's not clear that the liberals have a response to the collapse of growth economics.
Yeah, I guess I don't agree with you that economic growth is coming to an end. I just don't agree.
I'm not saying that it's coming to an end. I'm saying as a strategy of perpetual growth can't happen in an ecosystem. This is the burden of truth about either the peak oil or the climate issue.
Yeah.
Now, neither conservatives nor liberals have faced up to the problem of self-imposed self-restraint. What they're doing at this point is selling one or another version of growth and distributing it between different classes. And they're arguing about that. But they're not pointing to the fact that we're living on a finite ecosystem with limited capacity for more.
Yeah, well, I guess this is where I did disagree with you, that scientific innovation has overcome many supposed limits to growth before. I mean, this is, we had the Club of Rome's report on the limits to growth, how many years ago? Maybe 30 years ago.
72. It was a very important report.
And was spectacularly wrong about every projection that it made. I think, many of these assumptions are perhaps they're worth looking at, but what they really have to do is to drive scientific and technical innovation, because it turns out we can still grow with less consumption of energy, with less damage to the environment. In fact, it's the conservatives, it's the business groups who have always said, if you pass these environmental regulations, it will stop the economy from growing. It seems to me you have the same position, but it has turned out repeatedly that this is wrong, that there are ways to overcome the seeming obstacles that they hold up.
Well, this was precisely George Bush's message last Friday to the people that he assembled at the White House to talk about climate. Techno-scientific salvationism. And nobody believes it.
Okay, well.
I wanted to mention here in New England, we're used to Republicans that are rather moderate, and you don't mind if they get in office, every so often, kind of balance things out. What do you see as the future?
You're not referring to Mitt Romney, are you?
No. I was actually thinking of the young man's comment about, dismantling, the conservatives dismantling some of the things that, liberals put in. And it makes you think that maybe they have gone to an extreme to where there's something to the theory that conservatives can't govern because they don't believe in government, that they just want to shrink agencies and institutions, put incompetent cronies in place because you don't really need, to put much thought into things. And it does kind of make you, nostalgic for the Bob Doles or the Lincoln Chafees or, somebody that, you could work with again. And what do you see as the possibility of the shift in Republican?
Well, I think you're right. Back in the 1950s, when I was growing up, when Dwight Eisenhower was president, there wasn't that big a difference in terms of the fundamental attitude toward government, in terms of the competence that Republicans brought to office. I think that's still true of some Republicans, Schwarzenegger in California, and perhaps some of the Republicans who've been governor in this state, Massachusetts. But there has been a bigger change in the Republican Party, a shift toward a much more radical anti-government view. And I think from their point of view, first of all, undermining the fiscal integrity of government is not a problem. It will handicap liberals later on. And they have been completely indifferent about maintaining the competence, the capacities of various agencies. So yes, I think this is a failure of their stewardship of public responsibility.
Congress, and I wonder that my first question is, would you respond to that? Is this something that is so far out of the American tradition that it won't work, or is it actually developing secretly before our very eyes? That's the first question. The second one, I'd like to go back to the paradox that Bob Kuttner talked about as the core of your book, because I think that paradox deserves a little bit more examination. People get outraged because of Iraq. People get outraged because of the lack of stewardship. But from my perspective, the most serious thing that the current government is doing is really undermining that constitutional basis for democratic government. And that's what your paradox addresses, so I want you to address that.
Okay. So the first part of the question was about the discipline of the political parties, the internal discipline. I agree with you. The Republicans in recent years have shown a much greater degree of internal discipline than have Democrats. And even when in the last year many people were expecting there to be significant defections from the Bush administration on Iraq, it really hasn't happened. The Republicans have been able to maintain control, maintain discipline, and very few have broken ranks. So there is both parties have become more ideologically coherent. The Democratic Party, since conservative Southerners have left, have said the Democratic Party is a more liberal party. And the Republican Party, given the virtual extinction of that species liberal Republican, I mean, there are a few who you could call moderate, but the Republican Party has become much more consistently conservative. But I think the Republican Party just has much better internal discipline in the Congress, and there are a variety of potential explanations for that. I think, yes, given this. There were many desirable aspects of the bipartisanship that existed in the 1950s and 60s, where there's a lot of crossing over from the party, many desirable aspects, but that is gone. And I think if the Democrats are going to be able to govern, if there is a new Democratic administration, they are going to have to show some of this same discipline. Now, that's not quite a parliamentary system, but I think it has a little bit more resemblance to it than we are used to in this country. Now, on the second question is a more philosophical question about the importance of constitutional restraint, constitutional liberties, and how is it that liberals could have advocated a more expansive kind of government in the 20th century, and yet also maintained this tradition of constitutional rights. And I think the two really go together. That is really the central message of this book, that the only way that it became tolerable to expand the role of government with Social Security and Medicare and various other programs was also to assert stronger individual protections, stronger civil liberties, stronger limitations, including a stronger role for the press, for the sciences and so forth, to be guardians, to check the potential abuses. And I think that is really one of the great achievements. That conservatives didn't believe it was possible that you could expand the role of government and yet maintain individual rights, and yet it did prove possible. In fact, I think government has, in many ways, certainly in the case of civil rights, the federal government was essential for expanding the rights of African Americans. So there is a connection here, and I think that is the tradition that we are trying to carry on.
Why is it so hard for people to see that? Why why doesn't the media see that? And why doesn't the media use its words and words and words and columns and columns and columns to explain this?
Let me just put an exclamation point on that question. I think you're right that it was by making sure that government was a defender of liberties that the voters were accepting of a more expansive government in areas like Social Security and Medicare and taxation. But if that's the case, how is it that Bush has been able to invert that recipe and have a very powerful government that invades more and delivers less? Why are the voters sitting still for that?
Well, I don't think they are now. But look, after 9/11, Americans panicked, as is understandable under such circumstances. It happened before during the Cold War. It's happened on repeated other occasions. Fear is a dangerous force, and when it was set loose by 9/11, it became a basis on which constitutional liberties could be restricted, and governmental power is extended in very dangerous ways.
But Paul, this comes back to my point about leadership. It wasn't just the people who were fearful. It was too many of our liberal democratic leaders. Russ Feingold stood up to it. Nothing terrible happened to him at the polls. And I wish more of our Democratic friends, we stood up for it, to it in the American Prospect. I mean, I'm very proud of our position after 9/11, which was that, yes, the United States had every right to go in and take out the Taliban, who had done this terrible thing to New York City, but no, it was absolute folly to invade Iraq. And I wish there had been more elected officials who had been more vigilant early on without fearing retribution at the polls and had stood up to that climate of fear.
Okay.
We can have one more question. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Perhaps we could close on a thought piece with the convergence of two streams of thought. I've been struck by the Ken Burns series, particularly the theme that Roosevelt was successful in getting the entire country involved in the war effort somehow. And this was a unifying force. I'm sorry it was war, but
yes,
in terms of how it gets done.
Yeah.
So maybe getting everybody involved is the answer. I don't know, so I'll put it to you. But also with the following, is there one issue, absent war, for example, that might be the transcendent issue where all this fractionalism that we're seeing, liberal versus conservative, rich, poor, all the divisiveness that's taking place, somehow we can transcend it and unify the country again. Could you take a shot at that?
Well, war has been a very powerful national experience, and one of the arguments that I make in this book is that war, as terrible as it has been, war in the 20th century had the effect, actually this goes back even to the Civil War and earlier, war has resulted in greater democratization. Typically, during wars, after wars, voting rights have been expanded. And in some cases, social and economic rights have also been expanded in periods of war and right after. The war that we have been going through has not had that effect at all, partly because of the way this administration has chosen to fight it and to present it, so that no sacrifice was asked of the American people in Iraq, unlike World War II, where people were asked to sacrifice and join together. Nothing like that was done with Iraq. In fact, supposedly tax increases, tax cuts were a vital thing to continue in spite of the war. So this is an example of where different political leadership could have used the situation for very different purposes. I don't think you can just say some situation generates the result of greater national solidarity. It takes leadership to do that. I think some of the challenges that we've been discussing tonight, like environmental challenges, can be a basis on which people are brought together. But it will take the right leadership in order to do that.
It's a good note to end on. Thank you, Paul Starr.